I'm putting myself in the shoes of the athlete who is struggling to break through that next barrier for 2K performance, right? They've been working hard, training, they've sat down, they've done 2 or 3 tests, and they can't get over that next little barrier, right? And sometimes it always falls around the round numbers, right? They can't get past 8 minutes, they can't get past 7:30, they can't get past 6:30, they can't get past 6:20, right? Whatever it may be, depending on the athlete's experience level. But you can take this kind of wherever you want because it's a very broad topic, but talk about the mental side of training, the ability to fight through those barriers that are holding ourselves back, or the inability to fight through some of those barriers that are holding athletes back. Talk about that a little bit for me, if you don't mind.
It's a great point, and it's great because I was actually going to bring out the point that often you're not going to be everything has to work together, right? The physiology, the psychology, the technique, and so on. So often you will do workouts that physiologically make no sense to do, given your training volume and everything else. But you're absolutely going to be seeing benefit from a mental perspective, or sometimes from a technical skill perspective. Is can you hold that technique or rating for that period of time? So that's what. But I think as long as it's a conscious choice that you're making at that point in time, then that's awesome. So I want to talk about the psychobiological model of endurance sports in a moment. But there was this one study that just came out a few months ago, where the Swiss under-17 cycling team tried to answer the question of how much is physiological versus how much is mental, and they ran a time trial with the athletes cycling 1,300 meters uphill. What they did for the physiological measure, they used VO2 max, the maximum amount of oxygen you can generate. So it's basically an aerobic engine measure, if you like. And they had a whole bunch of psychological measures, self-assessed in this and so on and so forth. They all then, the scientists went away, got their stats packages out and started to get very excited and crunched all the numbers. And they came back with, in layman's terms, the answer that the results could be explained 80% by the physical metric and 20% by the mental side. So in this particular one case, it was like 80% physiological, 20% mental. And that to me says, it is still really important to develop that aerobic monster. But that 20%, that's non-negligible. That's actually, that's going to make a difference. And what was interesting is that the psychological factor that was predominant in that was perseverance, which is a major underlying part of both grit and mental toughness. So I think that, underlying the psychobiological side of things and thinking through the mental side, I think that's kind of an interesting kind of way to contextualize it, as you say, understand what you're working on and why you're working on it. So the mental side, psychobiology is an interesting term. You've got psychology, biology. What it really says is, it used to be thought in the classical way that the reason you slowed down or stopped was primarily a mechanical failure. It was pain, muscle fatigue, and so on. The psychobiological model says, no, you know what? Pain and muscle fatigue are very real, but it's really the balance between motivation and perceived exertion that actually figures out whether you slow down or stop. And muscle pain and fatigue are part of perceived exertion, but then there's a whole bunch of other factors that go in there as well. So how mentally fatigued you are, how positive you're feeling, your self-belief, hydration. You look at the factors, and there's a whole raft of factors that go into that. You can actually, as an athlete, learn around, and as a coach, learn around, and actually control. So I think that you can talk, and I'm happy to talk about grit and mental toughness, which is kind of, you can get into kind of how do you develop those. And those are very, very teachable concepts. But if you're looking to break through that barrier on your 2K, if you're looking to say, okay, from a psychological perspective, I really want to get to the next level here. I think there's a study by the British Psychological Society. Again, it was like literally about a year ago. And it's like, thank you, scientists, because they went away and they looked at all the literature, and they came back with what are the approaches that the literature says are real, are proven, and that you can actually administer without a sports psychologist on staff. And there were four that I think are particularly relevant to rowing. One is race goal setting, and I'll talk more about what that is specifically. Second is self-talk, which I think is enormous. I've had huge effect with that. If-then planning is another psychological tool you use. And then very particular race planning around how you do that. So if I break that down, if someone comes to me and says, I can't get through on the 2K, first of all, I would say, you look at what their goals are, and often they'll have a number that they're trying to hit. You say, well, let's actually create another set of goals and actually be thinking more about process goals, about how you're going to feel at a 500, what you're going to be thinking, and so on and so forth, and kind of break that down. I think if you look at that, that can be quite motivational to have the chunked goals there. The area that I would probably focus most on is, I would say, what's that voice in your head saying, and how are you responding? Because you'll find everybody has that voice in their head, right? That when you get to 1,000 meters, you're just like, the voice is going, "You're done. Your legs are burning," and it's very difficult to kind of and just you got 500, and you literally that voice is going to be chirping away. So actually have the athletes name their voice, and some of them call it Mr. Grumpy. Other ones have names that they then won't tell me because I know that they're not allowed to use that language around the gym. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Just they need to, because that voice isn't going to go away. Ignoring it is actually worse than listening to it. But you need to have a good answer for it. So, and then you start to break down, what is the narrative in your voice? What is your, let's think about two things. Let's think about motivational self-talk, and let's think about technical self-talk as well. So the technical self-talk could be things like how you're actually going to be, thinking about the technique at various people. That can actually be quite a good distraction. And also be helpful in terms of performance, particularly on the water. But the motivational self-talk, I think, is very interesting. And what you find is there's no rocket science to this. Certain phrases will work better with certain athletes than others, and a phrase at certain periods in the 2K will work better. They'll be different as they go through. So often some of the self-talk early on is calming. It's just about being focused, about sticking with the plan, about attaboy, they're sort of just great, you're doing perfect. So, and then the stuff comes later, which is just the really kind of the motivational stuff. And of interest, when you actually develop that self-talk, and the most advanced athletes here will journal it, and actually develop a self-talk plan through the race, for the race. They'll work on phrases, and they'll either work or they won't. If they don't work, they throw them out, and the ones that work, keep in. Putting that self-talk in the second or third person is better than in the first person. So I can do it is not as motivational. There's a wonderful study here that actually gave a numerical answer to this. It is actually less effective than you can do it, or Kevin can do it. I mean, it's kind of a little interesting kind of anecdote around that. So I think that the third one was the if-then planning, which is if something happens, what am I going to do? And often that means it could be all of a sudden I fall off the split, or it could be things that you can actually think, that they're probably going to happen, or your legs start burning, or that you're actually ahead of split, it's feeling easier than you thought it would, or that you rotated too high. I mean, so you can think of all these contingencies, or it could be the person next to you falls off the erg, or it could be someone opens the door, or it could be the coxswain that you have said, "Please don't say anything behind me," is now standing behind you, yelling in your ear. I mean, so actually thinking through all these contingencies and actually having a plan for how you're going to react and think and feel can be particularly helpful. That can work on the erg. It can be even more powerful when you're actually racing side by side, and you could be thinking about what the competitors are doing, how things are going, whether maybe what are you going to think and do if you catch a buoy, so on and so forth. So race goal setting, self-talk, if-then planning, and then putting all that together, the self-talk, the if-then planning, everything into that, and the goals into a race plan that is chunked, I think and then practicing parts of those race plans. So having a race plan you've never done before is unlikely to be successful. You can, as best you can, practice the components simulate what you can be. So I think it was a great example of an athlete that had a lot of mental kind of challenges around a 2K, um, and uh, and she worked around this, and she worked on the self talk and did a great job, and the attitude of positivity. I remember she came back having just met her goals and talked through the race, and she's like, "Well, I went off, and it felt really great to begin with." And then I got to 1,000 meters and my legs were burning. I thought, uh-oh, here we go again. And she said, so I told myself, this is great because I wanted to go quite fast in the first half. It means I must be there. And so she talked through the whole thing and it got through to then I had, last minute and I was dying and I said, I've come this far. What's another 20 strokes? So raced it very much between the ears with every opportunity being interpreted in the most positive way. And I think that's one of the keys. That, again, isn't a skill. Well, it is a skill that you can accumulate relatively quickly. But I think getting good at it takes time. And I think a conscious, deliberate way of developing that kind of set of mental skills can really, really help an athlete out in not just on the earth, but on the water and then in other aspects of their lives as well.